Welcome to the Torah of Rabbi Immanuel Bernstein.
So this week we inaugurate the Chumash of Vayikra, known as Torah's Kohanim, which deals, among many other things, but of course, principally and significantly with Korbanos. And the discussion in Parshas Vayikra does not take long to be initiated. It begins with the very first word, Vayikra el Moshe, that Hashem calls to Moshe. That's just to read the pasuk. Vayidaber Hashem elav me'ol moed lemor. Hashem speaks to him from Ohel Moed, from the tent of meeting, which is the Mishkan. So it all begins with Hashem calling Moshe. And the question is, what is the goal of this calling? What is its purpose? What end does it serve? And what would happen if Hashem hadn't called Moshe, to put it that way? And the accompanying question is, why is Vayikra specifically mentioned here in the beginning of Parshas Vayikra? Is this something that only happened on this one time? Did it happen in other times? And if so, why is it not mentioned? So as much as we take it for granted, and needless to say, Vayikra wouldn't be the same without it, what is happening with the calling of Moshe? And indeed, we find two main approaches to this question in Rishonim, and each of them are sourced back Lamala Bakodesh into the words of Chazal themselves. Rashi, I think, is well known, and we'll read his words. They are based in the Torah's Kohanim, which is the Medrash Halacha for Chumash Vayikra. And on the words Vayikra el Moshe, Rashi says, Lechol dibros, or lechol amiros, or lechol tzivuyim. Before any statements, conversations, commandments, they were all preceded with Kodma Kriya. Hashem first calls Moshe. Lashon Chiba. It's an expression of how beloved Moshe is to Hashem. And as the Torah's Kohanim says, elaborates, Rashi doesn't quote that part, but Hashem actually called Moshe by name each time. We're familiar with this from the burning bush. Hashem calls him Moshe. Moshe, according to the Torah's Kohanim, that happened on an ongoing basis. Lashon Chiba, as if to say, Moshe is already in a place where he could hear Hashem talking and Hashem could just start talking. But he doesn't do that. He prefaces each communication by calling Moshe by name to show Moshe how beloved he is. And as the Chassam Sofer says, once Moshe has that reminder of how beloved he is, that's what gives him the koach to receive and absorb fully the message from Hashem. But what we should note as Rashi's understanding here is that Vayikra was something that preceded every mitzvah, which means, in principle, if we were there and following all the communications in Chumash, Vayikra, and beyond, we would hear every single mitzvah start with Moshe, Moshe. The reason why the Torah doesn't say Vayikra more than at the beginning of Vayikra is because this is when it all began. This is where we begin to have the formal and ongoing transmission of Torah and communication from within the Ohel Moed. So it's said at the first occasion, but it should be understood as equally pertaining to all subsequent occasions. That's Rashi's approach. Other Rishonim, among them Ibn Ezra, Rashbam, and in a slightly different way, but the Ramban as well, certainly generally in concurrence. The Rishonim begin with another question, and it's seemingly a glaring syntactical question. Vayikra el Moshe doesn't seem to be the way, or the intuitive way, to begin a sefer, to begin a chumash, for the simple reason that Vayikra is the pronoun. He called, and it doesn't say who called. Now, of course, we can assume that it's Hashem. And moreover, the pasuk goes on to say, Vayidaber Hashem elav. So there is clearly no two ways about it. That may well be. It doesn't change the fact that the way to begin a sefer certainly would seem to be by mentioning your nouns. You've got to start with those who are involved, and then you can talk about him or it or so on. But you can't start just without naming them. As surely as so many parshas in the Torah begin, Vayidaber Hashem Moshe lemor, each time it mentions Hashem by name, it mentions Moshe by name. That's how you begin. You can't just miss out Hashem and just rely on everyone to assume that it's Hashem, even if it's correct. But it's not correct in terms of how a parsha should be. So that's a very interesting shaila. What are we to make of the immediate use of the pronoun? And no noun. Well, one thing we do know, and that is whenever a pronoun is used, such as he, without saying who it is, it is connecting us back to the last time that noun was mentioned. That much is always true. There cannot be a he or an it unless the he and it have been specified previously, which means it's meant to take us back to the last time Hashem was mentioned. But when is the last time Hashem is mentioned? It's in the end of Pekudei. And I think the last thing we're expecting to do when we start the Chumash of Vayikra is to go back to the end of Chumash Shemos. But actually, the word Vayikra is guiding us back there. And what do we see at the end of Pekudei, as the pasuk details? Moshe was unable, either was unable or felt unable to enter the Ohel Moed because Hashem's cloud was on top of the Ohel Moed, and Hashem's glory filled the Ohel Moed. V'lo yachol Moshe lavo el Ohel Moed ki shachan alav hanan Hashem. And this now is the background. Moshe can't go in, or certainly feels that he can't go in such conditions. To that end, Hashem calls Moshe, as if to say, you can come in. He either grants him permission or empowers him to enter even under those conditions. But that's not something Moshe could do if he weren't called to do it. And with this in mind, these Rishonim understand that this Vayikra now, which of course is very different from Rashi, was not something that was necessary on an ongoing basis. Meaning once Moshe is told that he can go in, he can go in. And therefore Vayikra is stated here for Rashbam and Ibn Ezra. This is where it happened. On this occasion, Moshe needed to be invited. But once he is invited, so now he knows. He can enter. And Vayikra was kan nimtza kan haya. This is where you find it. This is where it occurred. What's very interesting is the Ramban, picking up on the same idea, notes that this idea that the Hashem's cloud is there and Moshe needs to be called, this is not the first time we find this in Chumash. It's the second. We found it already at Har Sinai, almost word for word, describing the same thing. Hashem's cloud was on Har Sinai, and Hashem called Moshe to enter. In other words, what we're seeing here, in a sense, is a reiteration of the experience that Moshe had at Sinai. Hashem's cloud is there. He doesn't feel that he can enter until Hashem calls and tells him that he can, and then he does. So too with the Mishkan. So it's amazing to see the connection between these two. And of course, according to the Ramban, they are very much connected, because the whole idea of the Mishkan, as the Ramban describes it, is that it is meant to be a transferal of the Shekhinah that was there at Har Sinai, which now moves to the Mishkan, to where the Aron is, to the Ohel Moed. So it's literally really the same concept that is now moving with Bnei Yisrael through the Midbar. Sinai moves with them in this regard. And therefore, because you have the very same elements at play, so we certainly understand how these same things that were experienced at Sinai as Hashem initiated communication with Moshe will be re-experienced in the Ohel Moed. And so therefore, as we say, one only needs to read the words Vayikra al Moshe, and already there is a discussion. Why is Hashem calling? Why is it mentioned here? To what end? Where's Hashem's name in the beginning of Vayikra? And these are the classic opinions and approaches of the Rishonim to this matter. As we know, the Vayikra draws attention not only for its meaning, but also because it has the noteworthy small aleph, aleph ze'ira. Every once in a while, we come across either unusually small letters in the Torah or unusually large letters in the Torah, ze'ira or rabasi, and Mefarshim will discuss them. And one of the famous explanations of this, which is a big chiddush, but we'll hear his words, the famous explanations of the small aleph on the word Vayikra is cited by the Balaturim. And of course, the Balaturim often discusses these matters, these Ramazim and so on. And the Balaturim says that Moshe was reluctant to write the word Vayikra about himself. For everything that we've said about Vayikra, it shows how beloved Moshe is and how he's the designated one and he's the chosen one. And Moshe was not comfortable writing that, which itself is very interesting because, of course, Moshe is not consulted as to what will be written in the Torah. He is meant to transcribe. But Moshe more felt that what was appropriate for him is Vayikar without the Aleph, because Vayikra with the Aleph means he is called. But Vayikar without the Aleph is more from an expression of Mikra, which very lahavdil is the way the Torah describes Hashem speaking to Bilam. Vayikar Elokim al Bilam. And Moshe feels that Hashem happens to be speaking to him, but it didn't have to be him, etc. But Hashem says, the word is Vayikra. So write Vayikra. And Moshe does, but he wrote the Aleph small. That's where the small aleph comes. According to the tradition cited by the Balaturim, it was Moshe's decision. He cannot remove the letter aleph if Hashem told him to write it, but he can write it smaller. And interestingly, this medrash is cited in halachic works, although of course there will be always the issues of the halachic ramifications from midrashim, but the Piskei Teshuvah, more correctly, in Yeridea, in Hilchas Sefer Torah, as we know, there are certain letters that should be written small and certain letters that should be big. And what if a Sefer Torah was written with one of the normal letters, but it was written small, either by mistake or not? Is the Sefer Torah still okay? Says the Piskei Teshuvah, we can see from here the Sefer Torah would still be kosher. The letter is still there. It's written larger or smaller than it should be, but the letter is still there, and the word hasn't changed. And as his proof, he cites this medrash, because it seems that Hashem did not tell Moshe to write the aleph small. That's Moshe's decision. So to speak, as per the way Hashem would tell him to write the Sefer Torah, the aleph should be regular, but Moshe wrote it smaller. And of course, every Sefer Torah is written like that since, and the Sefer Torahs are obviously kosher. So this is a very interesting halachic pickup from the small aleph of Vayikra. But either way, the gist of what the Balaturim is saying is an expression of the humility of Moshe. It's a small aleph, and he doesn't necessarily feel so worthy, and that's how it remains. There is a classic question that is raised by Mefarshim on this idea. Namely, this is not the first time the Pasuk has said that Hashem called to Moshe. Once again, by the burning bush, Hashem called to Moshe, Vayikra Moshe, and also at Har Sinai. I mean, these are the three: the burning bush, Har Sinai, and Ohel Moed. And all of the earlier Aleph of Vayikra are normal size, regular size. We only see this idea that Moshe feels that he doesn't deserve to have Vayikra in the third case of Vayikra itself. And that's an interesting shaila. Why would that be? Why is this idea being communicated here? And there's many answers to this question, but a very wonderful approach is to be found in the writings of Reb Shmuel David Volkin, Zatzal, the son of the base Aaron, Aaron Volkin, and the father of my Rebbe, Zatzal, Reb Chaim Volkin. And he refers us to a statement in the Gemara in Nedarim, in Daf Lamed Ches. What qualifications does a person need in order to become a Novi, in order to become a prophet? So the Gemara says, Ein HaKadosh Baruch Hu mashresh chinoso. Hashem only allows the divine presence to rest on someone with the following four qualifications. Chacham, has to be wise. Gibor, strong. Oshir, rich. Ve'onov, and humble. So he has to be wise, strong, rich, and humble. And many Mefarshim ask, I can understand how things like wisdom and humility, these are traits that one would certainly need to be a Navi. But why does he have to be rich? What's that got to do with anything? And we should know, for fuller disclosure, that when the Rambam discusses this in the Shmona Prakim, the qualifications of a Navi, he very interestingly does not take the idea of riches and strength kipshuto, what we would call kipshuto. Rather, he explains the idea that a prophet needs to be rich in the sense that we say in Pirkei Avos, Eizehu Ashir, Hasamech Bechelko. He has to be content with his lot. That's a moral stance, not a fiscal one. And he has to be strong in the sense that Ezu Gibor Hakovish Yes Yitzro. Again, moral strength. According to the Rambam, all of these four things are intellectual, spiritual, moral attainments, not material attainments. He doesn't explain Asher Kipshuto, but others do. Reb Chaim Volozhin, in the beginning of his Perush on Pirkei Avos, Ruach Chaim, explains that really the primary characteristic, the primary quality that one needs to develop in order to receive nevuah is humility. Because humility allows the person to self-efface and allow the light of the divine presence in. As long as the ego is there, as long as the person is there in a way that he really shouldn't, so then there isn't enough room for Hashem's message to come through. So in the end, it's all about anova. However, says Reb Chaim, when is a person truly humble? After all, if someone has life circumstances that don't really lend the person to being haughty, so that humility is a lesser attainment. After all, there are some people who are humble and you kind of can't blame them. If one could quote from Churchill's appraisal of Clement Attlee, he called him a modest man with much to be modest about. And therefore, as long as a person, he's not so influential, he's not so much of means, so maybe he's a humble person, but maybe it's because they never gave him shlishi. But if they did, life would change. And therefore, the way to understand these qualifications, says Reb Chaim Volozhin, is that he's all of those things. He's strong, and he's wealthy, and he's wise, and with all that, he's still an anav. That's called anava. So says Reb Chaim Volozhin in the Ruach Chaim. And how does this relate to us? Says Reb Shmuel David Volkin. Was Moshe rich? According to the Gemara, he was, but he became rich as a result of the second luchos. The Gemara darshans, when Hashem says to Moshe in Parshas Kisisa, Psal lecha shne luchos avonim, carve out for yourself The material of the luchos was a very rare diamond mineral type material, very valuable. When you carve out, so then some of the dust in that material is now available. And Hashem says, Psal lecha, hapsoles yeh lecha. All of the carvings from the luchos are now yours. Moshe at this point emerges as a very wealthy individual, which he wasn't before, especially if we are mindful of the fact that when everyone else was leaving Bereishis Gadol, so Moshe spent his time going after the rare mitzvah of collecting the bones of Yosef. But now Moshe emerges as an Osher. At this point, he has all of the qualifications that the Gemara says, and still he's an Onav Mikol Adam. That's a different grade of humility. And therefore, Rav Volkan suggests that the reason why the Torah delayed or chose the final Vayikra to show us the diminished Aleph of Moshe is that even when he became wealthy, nonetheless, he is still Onav Mikol Adam. The Aleph Ze'ira is there. So as we so often see, this is what we call Jewish geography, the location of where the Torah chooses to communicate messages. Sometimes it's where they are their at most potent, if not necessarily the first opportunity. Sometimes the Torah waits because the Torah feels it's worth the wait. As we move on from the first few words of the Parsha into the opening parak, we find korbanos are presented. And the first types of korbanos that are spoken about are animals. And as the Pasuk says, this is in Pasuk Beis, Daber Abnei Yisrael v'amar lehem Adam ki yakriv mikem korban Hashem. One will offer, from among you will offer a korban. If it's from behema, then it's min habakar or min hatzon. If it's from the category of animals, it should be from the cattle or from the flock. So it will be cows or sheep and goats and so on. And something that is very worthwhile noting with regards to korbanos, of course, we assume it would never cross our mind that a non-kosher species could be used as a korban. But we also need to consider at the same time that there are many yes kosher species which are not acceptable as korbanos. Within the animal world, we have what's called behema, domesticated animals, we would say, and chayos. And as the Torah will discuss them in Parshas Shmini and then again in Parshas Re'eh, there are a number of beasts that are 100% kosher. They're in the category of chaya, and they're not included in the program of korbanos. And it's an interesting shaila. We would have thought if it's not an animal of prey and if it's not kosher, ya'aleh v'yavo, but it's not the case. So why is it that animals are kosher for korbanos and not chayos, domesticated animals, but not undomesticated? And this question is actually addressed by the Medrash. And the Medrash says that this was done by Hashem out of consideration for the Jewish people. After all, says Hashem, if I tell you that chayos, these beasts, are also kosher, where are you going to find them? They're in the forest. You're going to have to go hunting for them. You're going to have to try and trap them, and it's a whole production. Therefore, says Hashem, lo hitrachti aleichem. I did not trouble you to go out in pursuit of wild animals. Take from things that are at hand, from the pen. Mina behema, Min HaBakar, Min HaTzon. So it was a kind of a deracheh darchei noam approach to make korbanos easier for the Jewish people. It's in the category of behemos, not of chayos. Rabbi Mintzberg, that's Al, who cites the Medrash, offers an additional way to understand it. And he takes us back to again read Pasuk Beis, which begins, Daber el bnei Yisrael v'amar lehem, speak to bnei Yisrael, say to them, Adam ki yakriv mikem korban Hashem. If a person from among you will offer a korban, it should be min habehema, min habakar, etc., etc. Here too, if we're sensitive to the nuance of the pasuk, the word mikem doesn't seem to be in the right place, so to speak. syntactically. Because if we translate this as if a man from among you will offer a korban, if the word mikem comes to qualify Adam, and it really seems that it does, so then the pasuk should have says, Adam mikem ki yakriv korban Hashem. If a man, any man among you who wishes to bring a korban. But it moves on from Adam to talk about ki yakriv, and then brings back the word mikem. And that's a detail that we should notice. Why is mikem, so to speak, deferred? If the question is clear, should have said Adam mikem ki yakriv. That's how we translate it. If a man among you shall offer a korban, Adam mikem. But it says Adam ki yakriv mikem. And that is why many Mefarshim understand that while there is no doubt that the word mikem, from you, relates to Adam, a man among you, it also relates to the word ki yakriv. It's a double message. That's what's happened by the word being deferred. Because mikem, from you, also is ki yakriv mikem. The korban needs to be from you. And what does it mean for the korban to be from you? It means it needs to be something that is coming from you, a part of you, almost. After all, let us not forget, according to many Rishonim, much of korbanos is that the person himself should be the korban. Now, of course, in the end, that's not what happens. He's allowed to have a substitute. But if the ultimate or pure korban would be the person himself, giving himself, so whatever he brings has to be giving of himself, that much needs to be true. That much needs to be the case. When does a person give of himself? Something that is typically with a person, that he develops, that he takes care of, and he breeds. It becomes his property. And as his property, it becomes part of him. And now when he gives something from that, he's giving of himself. And herein lies the difference between a behemoth, a domesticated animal, and an undomesticated. Undomesticated animals, they don't live with people. You can trap one and bring it as a korban if you want, but it's not really from you. It's not something that you've developed or bred or so on. And therefore, Rav Mintzberg suggests that because of the word mikem, it has to be something that's more ingrained within your experience as part of you, something that you would keep. And that's behemoths. That's domesticated animals. Very interesting approach. And with this in mind, he refers in one of his footnotes to Meshech Chochmah. And of course, Meshech Chochmah may start in a footnote, but he will very soon take over. Meshech Chochmah in Parshas Noach makes a fascinating observation. We know that Noach brought 2 of each animal, except the pure species. He brought 7 of each. Why? Well, for purposes of bringing korbanos. But here's an interesting point to consider. From which species did he bring 7 of each? Anything that's pure. Anything that's kosher. If it's not kosher, it's 2 by 2. If it's yes kosher, it's 7. And then he brought them as korbanos. But what that means is the korbanos, or the range of korbanos that Noach brought after the flood, was much broader than will ever be brought subsequently. Because there are kosher beasts, like we say, the deer and whatever else they are, all those that are mentioned, they're also kosher. The Torah says whatever's kosher came 7 to Noah for purposes of korbanos. That means he offered a korban of every kosher species. Animal, beast, doesn't make a difference. But that's not true, Ladoros. So why does why does Noah bring korbanos from these things? So how do we reconcile that or understand it, that they will not be part of the ongoing program of korbanos? Says Meshech Chochmah, disarmingly simple. According to the Medrash, the reason why chayos, undomesticated animals, are not part of the program of Korbanos is because Hashem did not want to trouble people to go hunting for them. Well, generally, that would be the case in order to get hold of them. But in this one situation, they're all there with Noah. They've been there for a year. And therefore, this is the one time, Al Pi the Medrash, that you can offer a korban from a chaya. It is as little trouble for you to access it as a behemoth. So Noach brought them all as korbanos. But once everyone's released, the chayas go back into the wild, and no one needs to go after them, and they're not korbanos. Fascinating comment of Meshech Chochmah. Presumably, the reason why the Ben Melech or Leib Mintzberg mentions this Meshech Chochmah is because it can also be explained in terms of his analysis, as if to say, if we say that in order to fully answer to the name of a korban, it has to be mikem, from you, something that you've been involved with in their upkeep and so on. So as we said, for this past year, Noah has been involved in taking care of the chayos just as much as he has taken care of the behemoths. They all need to be fed, and the lion, as we know, got hungry. And therefore, in terms of Rav Mintzberg's discussion, in this situation, as a result of what happened over the course of this year, both behemoths and chayos are called mikem. They're all of Noah, because he was as involved and invested in the upkeep and the well-being of the chayos as he was of the behemoths. The division between them falls away, and he brought korbanos from both of them. So these are very interesting, again, things we take for granted or we don't think to question, because whatever the korbanos are, that's what they are. But it's not just korban equals kosher. There has to be more specific subdivision of behema and not chaya, and then why that subdivision was not followed in the particular case of Noah. As we move forward in the korbanos, we see that the korban is shechted, and then there certain parts are offered. Well, this is an olah, so it's pretty much everything is offered on the mizbeach, and that's described in pasuk Zion, or pardon me, pasuk Ches. V'archu b'nei Aaron haKohen es hanesachim ala rosh v'sapard ala eish ala eitzim asher al ha'esh. Sorry, my references here is the pasuk later. Should be pasuk Zion. V'nosnu b'nei Aaron haKohen eish ala mizbeach. They put the fire on the mizbeach, and then they offer the korban. They bring it up, and it's consumed. Rashi comments on the idea that Aaron's sons are the ones who bring the fire to the mizbeach. And Rashi says, "Afa pisha eish yeredes min hashamayim," even though a fire would come down from heaven, mitzvah lahavi ben hedjut. There is nevertheless a mitzvah to bring also from human agency. It's very interesting why Rashi makes this comment. As we know, Rashi always comes to explain Shuta Shamikra. The pasuk says that they put the fire on. That could just as easily be because there is no fire, and that's why they need to do it, as opposed to saying, well, there's already a fire, but they also need to bring fire. That one would need to consult Mefarshei Rashi as to why Rashi mentions this idea. But before we look into the idea of a fire coming down from heaven for the korbanos, and then the Kohanim also bringing their fire, and why do you need two fires, which Mefarshim discuss, I cannot help but go back to Rav Mintzberg with the following observation in the pasuk. We have read pasuk Zion, but there's something about this pasuk that will only be highlighted if we go back 2 psukim and then forward 1 pasuk. By which I mean, Aaron's sons are mentioned 3 times between pasuk Hey and Ches. And let us see how that happens. In pasuk Hey it says, "B'shachat es ben habakar lefnei Hashem." So it starts with the shechita of the korban. V'yikrivu b'nei Aaron hakohanim es hadam, and then they receive and bring the blood. that's the sprinkling of the blood, which of course is the first stage of avodah there. So the first time we see them, Aaron's sons in Pasuk K is the avodah of the sprinkling of the blood. Then in Pasuk Zayin, which we read, but we'll see again now, V'nosnu bnei Aaron HaKohen eish al HaMizbeach. They bring fire to the Mizbeach and the wood, etc. And then Pasuk Ches, they offer the sacrificial parts. V'archu bnei Aaron HaKohanim es hanesachim, es harosh, v'es hapader. They bring all the sacrificial parts. How many times one can read these psukim and not note that Aaron's sons are not referred to in the same way on all of these three occasions. In Pasuk Hey, they are referred to as Bnei Aaron HaKohanim. Aaron's sons, the Kohanim. And similarly in Pasuk Ches, V'archu Bnei Aaron HaKohanim. But in Pasuk Zayin, it says V'nosnu Bnei Aaron HaKohen eish al HaMizbeach. So out of these three times, twice they're called Bnei Aaron HaKohanim, and once Bnei Aaron HaKohen. And we, of course, are entitled to ask, what is the difference between those two ways of expression? I mean, to say, we well know if their father's a Kohen, they're a Kohen. So Bnei Aaron HaKohen and Bnei Aaron HaKohanim sounds to be two ways of saying the same thing, but they're not exactly the same. Who can explain why the pasuk shifts in this way, back and forth? Says Rav Mintzberg, classic. It is true that Aaron's sons are Kohanim because they're Aaron's sons. And in order to do the avodah, what qualifications does one need? To be a Kohen. And being the sons of Aaron, they are Kohanim. If the Torah should ever say that they're the sons of Aaron the Kohen, it means that the topic under discussion is not something that they naturally could do as Kohanim, but only because they're the sons of Aaron and he's a Kohen. But what does that mean? Well, avodah generally is in the province of the Kohanim. But there's something that we can see is in the particular domain of the Kohen Gadol. And that is the upkeep and the appearance of the Beis Hamikdash. As if to say, for the bias to look as it should look, fully on. In that regard, the Kohen Gadol is, so to speak, the custodian of the Beis Hamikdash, or the Mishkan. And where do we see this? There are certain mitzvahs. They are avodah in a sense, but they're also the way the house should. Lighting the menorah. We find in Parshas Omer that it will talk about Aaron lighting the menorah, and in Ba'al Osach, of course. Now halachically, you don't need the Kohen Gadol to light the menorah. But Aaron is always mentioned because this is a natural fit for Aaron. The way the Mishkan should look is there should be lights burning in the menorah. Because the difference between a place where the lights are on and where the lights are off, it's a different place. This is aside from the mitzvah of lighting the menorah and even the avodah of the menorah. And the same is true of ketores. We find that the reference will be to Aaron bringing the ketores, because the effect of the ketores, it changes the atmosphere of the place. The pleasant aroma of the ketores. And so Aaron will be mentioned by name. And what does this have to do with us? There is one area outside of the Mishkan, which is also how the Mishkan should look. And that is there should always be fire on the Mishkan, regardless of whether there's korbanos. In other words, as we will say in the beginning of Parshas Tzav, Eish Tamid, there always needs to be a fire burning. even if there's no karbonos, which means the fire burning isn't necessarily part of the avoda of karbonos. It's an independent concern. That's how the bias should look. The fire burning constantly on the Mizbeach. And because that's how the bias should look, so the seeing to it that there's fire on the Mizbeach and putting there, if there isn't there, that's in the province of Aaron, just like lighting the menorah and just like the Keteris. Bringing the korbanos is avoda. And therefore, says Rav Mintzberg, we well understand. Pasuk Hey, which is about the avoda of the korban, sprinkling the blood. So then his sons are called Bnei Aaron HaKohanim. As sons of Aaron, they are Kohanim. All you need to be is a Kohen. And so too, skipping over the middle pasuk to get to pasuk Ches, when they put the sacrificial parts on the Mizbeach, that's also avoda. And there too, you just need to be Kohanim, and they are Kohanim. The sons of Aaron, they are now Kohanim. But it's the pasuk in the middle which talks about them bringing the fire to the Mizbeach. That's already the tzivyon of the house. That's how it should look. That's how it should be. Its constant state should be like that, regardless of any avoda. That's something Aaron should do. Now, others can do it, but they do it as representatives of him. And that is why in that middle pasuk, they're not called Bnei Aaron HaKohanim, that they themselves are Kohanim, but rather they are representing their father, Aaron, the Kohen. Incredible attention to detail. So much comes out by the analysis of Rav Mintzberg. But coming back to Rashi, so in this middle pasuk, pasuk Zion, you have the fire, and Rashi informs us that you have the fire comes down from on high, and then the Kohen also brings the fire. What for the hedyot, so to speak, human fire? What does this mean, and why is it so? After all, we may ask, if a person is bringing the fire, why should the fire come down from heaven, and vice versa? Shnei fire is lamali. And a very wonderful explanation of this phenomenon, this feature within the avoda, is to be found in the Sefer Afika Yehuda. Afika Yehuda is one of the classic drush svarim. We have Rabbi Yehuda Edel of Slonim, contemporary of the Vilna Gaon, and he explains the reason why you have two providers of fire, a higher provider and a lower provider, is because the two fires are not the same, and you need both. Lower fire and the more elevated fire are not the same, and they don't have exactly the same function. Lower fire, as we know in our experience, it illuminates, but it also consumes. It's the nature of fire. But the more elevated fire, a more heavenly fire, it illuminates and it doesn't consume. It just illuminates. Doesn't need to consume anything to do that. And where do we see this first idea that a heavenly fire only illuminates but doesn't consume? The burning bush. Moshe sees V'inei hasneh bo'er ba'esh. It's burning, and it's not consumed. And Moshe says, Asurana, I have to take a look further at this. Why is the bush not being consumed? It's a good shaila. It's a shaila that seemingly is never answered. Moshe asked the question, and it's never addressed. Because the next thing we hear, before you look around, he's being sent out to Egypt to redeem the Jewish people. But whatever happened to the question? It seems, so to speak, that was to draw him in. But now that he's in, so go and redeem the Jewish people, and don't worry about the fire, why it's not consumed. It was never really addressed. But it says the Afika Yehuda, it was addressed. Because what is the first thing Hashem says to him? Take off your shoes. The place where you are now, Admas Kodeshi. You are on holy ground. And that is the answer to your question. Because since you are on holy ground, and this is on Hashem's terms, so to speak, so you're on holy ground, and the fire that is burning is a holy fire. Holy fire doesn't consume. A heavenly fire doesn't consume. That's the answer to your question. Admas Kodeshi. That's why Madua lo Yivarasne. It's an amazing observation in that parsha there. And coming back to where we are, and I will mention, by the way, just as a parenthetical point, I haven't seen anyone who says this. I would love to see someone who does. The miracle of Chanukah, where the lights lasted much, much longer than they needed to, and that is ascribed to the oil, something happened there. But could it be, and the result, of course, is the same, but just in terms of the understanding, could it be that what they were being granted here was the effect of more elevated fire? It's not so much that the oil had a miraculous property that had it consumed at a much slower rate. Or perhaps it was the nature of the fire that naturally consumes at a much lower rate, if at all. Be that as it may, we have many months till Hanukkah to ponder that. But coming back to the matter of korbanos, what do we see, says Afike Yehuda? When a person brings a korban, it means that they could do better. That's what a korban really represents. A person could do better, and hopefully they will. But what does that involve? Says Afike Yehuda, it involves two fires. One that consumes and one that illuminates. Because very often, what is holding a person back from really succeeding are aspects of themselves that shouldn't really be there. Behaviors and patterns and so on, that should be removed. And to that end, the person sets fire to the korban and it's consumed. And that represents the aspects of the person that really should disappear. But there are other aspects of the person that should not disappear. And moreover, for every negative tendency or trait that's controlling the person, there's a positive trait that's waiting to illuminate. It's waiting to be expressed. It's waiting to exert its influence over the person and to direct them and to guide them. And therefore, concomitantly with the consumptive fire that gets rid of the things that should be gotten rid of, there's a higher fire. There's the Eish Elyona, which then allows the person to illuminate things that may have been dim within their makeup until this point, but should really start to shine and express themselves. Doing better is not just about Sur Meirah, it's about Aseh Tov, and that's how the two fires, each one, have their contribution. Truly wonderful explanation of the Afike Yehuda. One of the very interesting, and with this we'll conclude this evening, one of the very interesting aspects of a korban is that korbanos are accompanied by salt. That's in Perek Beis, Pasuk Yud Gimel. And in fact, the presence of salt on the korban is covered by an aseh and a los aseh. That's 2 out of the 613 mitzvahs. In our experience, minhag-wise, this idea finds expression in having salt on the table, in dipping our bread in salt. That's because the table is like the mizbeach. Interestingly, many people, the time that they do this is on Shabbos. But it doesn't actually relate to Shabbos specifically. If the table is like the mizbeach is a week round thing. So in principle, it is as appropriate or applicable to put the bread in salt or to dip it in salt during the week as it is on Shabbos, but it could be that Shabbos is just a time where people have a bit more time, and of course, that is very often the nohag. What's most noteworthy is the minhag of the Chassam Sofer was to dip his bread in salt every day except for Friday night. So that's a bit of a compensation for everyone else. And why is this so? Very simply, says the Chassam Sofer, because the table is like a mizbeach, and therefore the food is like a korban, and korbanos were offered on the mizbeach every day except for Friday night, because the nighttime is when you burn the korbanos that were not burnt during the day, but you can't do that on Shabbos. Korbanos of a weekday that were not burnt cannot be consumed on Shabbos. So the one time when the Mizbeach actually would have no korbanos in it is Friday night, and therefore to reflect that, he would have to not dip his challah in salt on Friday night. Either way. Of course, it's very intriguing, we may say, this mitzvah, and not surprisingly, many Mefarshim, beginning with Rishonim, are forthcoming in explaining or advancing reasons for this idea. What is salt? What does that add to the korban? And on a simple level, the simplest one could say, again, Ibn Ezra and others, is that salt really adds tam, right? It enhances the flavor of whatever it is. And therefore, as surely as for a person's own personal consumption, they would want an enhanced product that they eat, so too, when we offer it on the Mizbeach, we offer it in an enhanced form, and therefore we add salt to the korban as we say, to offer it in an optimum form. The Rambam in the Moreh Nevuchim explains, and as we'll see, this is really in keeping with his general position as expressed in the Moreh Nevuchim. The Rambam says that many of the non-Jewish korbanos that were prevalent at the time, they would never allow salt anywhere near the korban because salt absorbs the blood, and they wanted as much blood to gather. For them, that was what the korban is all about. And for Rambam, a lot of the program of korbanos is to, on the one hand, it's a concession that there is korbanos, but it also has messages as to this is not, if you're bringing a korban, that's not the right way to bring a korban. It's not about the blood. On the contrary, the blood is sprinkled on the mizbeach. It's not collected. And moreover, whatever blood is left is absorbed by the salt. And therefore, this is in a sense is a statement as to what a kosher korban looks like. Okay, we don't mean in terms of the halachas of kashrus, but it really is a response, so to speak, in the Rambam's explanation to pagan sacrifices. But a question that is raised on the Rambam, one of the questions that's raised, is that the mitzvah of offering salt is not only on meat where there's blood, but there's another type of korban, which is a mincha, which is a meal offering. There's no blood there, but there is a mitzvah to put salt on the mincha as well. And not only is there a mitzvah to put salt on meal offerings as well, the mitzvah is actually stated within the context of mincha. That's our source in Perek Beis, Pasuk Yud Gimel, V'chol korban minchas Rabba Melech timlach. It's actually stated within the context of a mincha. So that's a very interesting and intriguing point vis-a-vis the Rambam, that, again, the explanation he gives in the Moreh Nevuchim, that it's contrary to the celebration of the collection of blood. It's actually stated with the one korban that doesn't have any blood in it. We do note that the salt, in the words that we just read, melach bris elokecha, the salt of the covenant, that's very interesting, as if to say, salt now relates not only, quote unquote, to the mitzvah, but there's a kind of a covenant as well. What is this covenant of salt? Rashi's words are well known. He quotes a medrash, and there's other more extensive quotations of the medrash elsewhere, but you have the idea that at the time of creation, the water was divided into two, higher waters and lower waters. And the lower waters, in a sense, were distanced. And the way the Zohar explains, the water is called mayim bochim, weeping waters, because they're distant from Hashem. But that's why their compensation or their consolation is that they are brought close to Hashem on the Mizbeach in two forms. Number one, salt regularly, and salt is extracted from seawater, which is a shaila in halacha. Does it have to be specifically salt from seawater? And secondly, famously in the Nisuch Hamayim, the water that is brought on Sukkos, and many Mefarshim discuss, as we have in the past, why do we need two representations of water in this way? The daily salt representation and then the annual actual water. representation, but this is Melach Bris, the covenant that was made with salt. So according to Rashi, it sounds like this is really a covenant between Hashem and the salt. And that's not something that we're used to encountering. Normally it's between Hashem and us about one thing or another. Tosfos do understand that the bris, that the melach reflects, is a bris between Hashem and humankind, because korbanos, they keep the world going, certainly in its optimum way. As we've mentioned very often, the observation of Rabbi Shua Heller, we have two Mishnayos in Pirkei Avos, and one of them says at the beginning of the parak, Al Shlosha Devarim Ha'olam Omed, and towards the end of the parak it says Al Shlosha Devarim Ha'olam Kayim, and gives different list of three. But as Rabbi Shua Heller explains in his paper, told us Yoshua that the earlier Mishnah was said at the time of the Beis Hamikdash. Omed means standing as it should. What keeps the world going in the optimum way? It's those three things: Torah, Avodah, and Gemilas Chasodim. Avodah meaning korbanos. Many generations later, there's no Beis Hamikdash, and the world somehow still endures. That's called Kayam, and that you need other things, ala din, ala emes, ala shalom. We don't, of course, understand fully the technology of the korbanos, but to appreciate their effect is something that we should give some attention to. And therefore, as surely as salt allows something to continue in the way that it started, so that's what korbanos are to the world. They allow it to continue in its optimum way, and therefore the bris is a preservative. It focuses on the medium of salt in that way. Rabbeinu Bachya, further on this idea of what keeps the world going, Rashi tells us in the beginning of Bereishis that Hashem, as we know, originally thought, so to speak, to run the world of Midas Hadin, but he saw that it couldn't endure, and therefore he attached Midas Harachamim. Says Rabbeinu Bachya, the two media of fire and water correspond to din and rachamim. Fire is often associated with Midas Hadin, and water more Midas Harachamim. And when you put the two together, if you would ever have fire and put it together with water, the result of that combination is salt. As we see when the sun beats down on the sea and dries it out, the salt remains, and therefore salt is a representation of the partnership of fire and water, which is din and rachamim, and that partnership is what keeps the world going, and that's why the bris is called bris melach. But a final idea, which I saw many years ago in the Sefer Divrei Shaul, of Yosef Shaul Halevi Natanson, author of the Shaul HaMeshiv, he explains that what's meant to be preserved here, and salt, he understands that, again, salt it does preserve, but what's meant to be preserved? The person, the world, the korban experience. We don't have the korban experience, but we can be sure that if a person comes to the Beis Hamikdash, it's very impactful. But it's the nature sometimes of impacts that they may be short-lived, as if to say, inspiring for its time, and then back to business. But as we know, the goal of a korban is to make a difference to the future, not just to give an elevating present. It's an elevated trajectory moving forward, not just higher in the current location. As we've quoted many times, the Maaseh Hashem explains that's why a korban is called reach nichoach. You get the aroma of something before you actually see it. It's on the way. That means that it's a sign of things to come. And that's what a korban should be. And therefore the Torah says, if you want your korban to be a positive experience, soak it in, but salt it, preserve it, see to it that its effects are maintained, that its reverberations are felt, and that its manifestations can be realized in your life moving forward. That's the message of salting the korban experience, to keep it going and make the optimum benefit from the korbanos. So these are some classic observations from Mefarshim, Rishonim, and Achronim with regards to the world of korbanos. It's a world that we ask to be restored, and the more we appreciate its effects and its benefits, the more we understand why that is. And that is something that we should be zochet to see, and always only hear and share Besoros Tobos and Yeshuos Menachamos. All the very best.